Presentation up.
Excellent. You can see we have our first attendees coming in. So I'll get going with the pleasantries. Let's just give people 2 seconds to join. Hello, and welcome to this session, How to Stop Liars. Enter the Golem, with Caroline Varenkamp of Wonders of the World podcast. A few things to cover before we begin. I am John. I will be helping with tech support and moderating the chat. This session is being recorded. I don't work for Zoom, but if you are having problems, please mention it in the chat and I will see if I can help. This session will be roughly 20 minutes of presentation, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A, but it has a hard stop at 40 minutes, or else I will get into a lot of trouble. And with that, it brings me great pleasure to introduce our speaker. Caroline has hosted Wonders of the World since 2016. An avid traveler and storyteller, Caroline brings her passion for our shared history to listeners each month. She lives in Indiana, has 2 teenage kids and a dog, and has gracefully accepted spinsterhood. On Wonders of the World, we visit the Earth's great places to tell the story of our people, our civilization, and our planet. From history to travel and even food, we examine what makes us great and what makes us human. Caroline's dumpling of choice is gyoza, which demonstrates that she has excellent taste. Ladies, gentlemen, and other delightful people, Caroline of Wonders of the World.
Thank you so much, John, and welcome everyone. And thanks for joining us on this Saturday, no matter where you are in the world, unless you're in Australia, it might be already Sunday. In which case, welcome and happy to spend your very early Sunday morning with us. I'm delighted to be here today. This is my third, I think, intelligence speech, so it's just exciting to be part of this program and be able to share my love of history and travel with the world, and to hear so many other amazing speakers and podcasters share their love and nerdy interests with everyone. So today we're going to talk about the theme was lies and deception, and we're going to talk about not just the lies but how to stop the lies. And one of the best ways to stop the lies is a golem. So we're going to talk about this today. We're going to move to set our scene in Prague, the capital of Bohemia, in 1592. Prague is one of the richest cities in Europe at the time. It is multicultural, it is prosperous, it is building success off of both industries and the natural resources in Bohemia, perched on the Vltava River. And in this, you can see the Charles Bridge. It had been the capital of the Holy Roman Empire under Emperor Charles IV back in the 14th century, the 1300s. And during that time, it had become a center of learning and of knowledge in the European world. The center of Europe. This is the Tyne Church. You can see the Prague Castle in the backyard. And the Prague Castle, which had been beautifully constructed in the Middle Ages, one of the great Gothic cathedrals of the world, was recently, in the 1590s, reoccupied by an emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, the German states. And that was this man, Rudolf II. So Rudolf II, fascinating fellow. If you get a chance, you can notice the Habsburg jawline, that so often correlates with members of his family. He was from the Austrian Habsburg line, cousins of the Spanish Habsburg line, but his mother was a Spanish Habsburg. He had the same grandparents on 2 different sides. He's a person of remarkable interest and genetic disasters. His son would later become a sociopathic murderer, which isn't great. His great grandmother, or maybe his grandmother, was locked up in a castle for going mentally ill. But Rudolf only showed great depression. Rudolf was someone who didn't much like being emperor or the king of Bohemia. He liked to surround himself with thinkers and and wishers and artists. He amassed an incredible art collection. He worked with alchemists and astrologers, trying to find that hidden message of God buried within science. And that's what Rudolf was trying to bring to the world. He didn't want to talk with diplomats. He didn't want to worry about the state of Europe. And he certainly didn't want to be the ruler of one of Europe's greatest superpowers. That wasn't very interesting. What was interesting was, how are we going to transmute lead to gold? And how are we going to understand how the birth charts and the planet's motion influence someone's lives and influence their path to destiny? Most importantly, his path to destiny. He's probably best known as being the patron of a Danish astronomer named Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe was is probably the greatest observationalist astronomer in the Renaissance, in maybe even all history. He was incredibly good at calculating and showing and marking exactly the locations of each of the planets as they passed their way across the night sky. And it was his astronomical data which allowed his assistant, Johannes Kepler, to develop the laws of planetary motion, and which influenced Galileo to identify the moons of Jupiter and the other great astronomical discoveries that Galileo would discover in that same time period. And a lot of this came from Rudolph's just way of being. Well, one of Rudolph's greatest connections, or one of his most famous connections, was with a rabbi, because Jewish Prague was an important part of the city. The Jews, as in most cities in Europe, lived in a ghetto in what is now the district of Josefov. I can never pronounce that correctly. Josefov. And they had been a part of Prague culture and life for centuries. The Old-New Synagogue, this Old-New Synagogue that you see here, was the oldest active synagogue in Central Europe. It continues to be the oldest active synagogue in Central Europe, built in 1297 and still used today, remarkably, having survived quite a lot of history between now and then and now. The head rabbi of Prague was this man, Judah Lov ben Bezalel, often called the Maharal, which is an anagram for MHRL in Yiddish, meaning our teacher, Rabbi Love. And that's Maharal, MHRL, which became Maharal, so they just call him the Maharal. This statue of Rabbi Love is perched outside the new town hall, and it's not super, complimentary. I don't know if he was quite so girthy, but he was the chief rabbi of Prague at the time of Rudolph's kingdom, of his reign. And Rudolph met with Rabbi Love to talk about the Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism that had come out of Spain in the early medieval period, and ideas of hidden messages encoded within the text of the Torah and the Talmud. And those hidden messages were things that that Rudolph found fascinating. He was convinced that there were these hidden messages from God everywhere. And so he had a deep conversation with Rabbi Love. Rabbi Love was one of the foremost experts of Kabbalah in history. Now, this is where our story diverts from history into mythology, potentially into less than diagnosed history. Well, I take that back. There is some history here. One of the chief bits of history that we know is the greatest lie, I believe, in human history, because it's the longest and most long-lasting lie that we've ever dealt with as a civilization, and that's the blood libel. The blood libel, which began in the early Middle Ages in Europe before the Black Death, claimed that Jews would murder Christians, and particularly Christian children, and use their blood in rituals like making matzah, which is absolutely ridiculous. If you've ever had matzah, there is no flavor whatsoever. If there was going to be blood, you'd taste a little something, but because Christians never tasted matzah, they didn't know. And they would tell us, this lie would continue to spread over and over again. And every time it would spread, it would bring hatred against the Jewish people. It would bring pogroms. It would bring the resentment. It would bring attacks. It would bring taxation. It would bring harassment. It would bring all of the terrible fates upon it. And it continues to be spread today. It's continued to be spread in the world today as a horrible anti-Semitic untruth, a falsehood, and continues to be spread. I even heard it on TikTok recently by Americans spreading this horrifying and absolutely untrue and provably untrue lie. Well, in Prague, this lie was going around, and one of the ways it was going around was that Christians would find ways to use it to harass their Jewish neighbors. And one of the ways they would do that is if their child died for any reason, and children died a lot back in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. After all, we didn't have antibiotics. If a child died of cholera, if a child died from an accident, if a child died from any particular reason, Christians would sneak over into the ghetto, leave the child's body, and then pretend to find it and blame the Jews for kidnapping and killing their child. And this would obviously bring, again, harassment and hate onto the Jewish community and numerous attacks. So Rabbi Love, this is again where we veered off of history into mythology, but the story goes that Rabbi Love decided he needed to find a way to defend the Jewish community from these liars. And the way he did it was he built a golem. Late at night, he, his son, and his nephew snuck out to the banks of the Vltava River, and they found clay there, nestled in the bank. And they dug out the clay, and lit by a lightning storm as the rain began, they made out of the clay a model of a humanoid figure. And using the power of the hidden messages of the Kabbalah, they animated the golem by carving one word, emet, into his forehead, which means truth. And as the lightning blasted and brought him to life, the golem arose and became the great warrior for the Jewish people of Prague. And here we see Rabbi Love telling the golem what to do. And the golem had some various responsibilities. He said, "You are here to protect the people of the Jews of Prague." And the golem said, "Okay." And they said, "I will name you Joseph." "Okay. And you will also sweep up the synagogue during the day." "Okay." All of it very simple, easy commands. And so the golem took action. By day, making sure the synagogue was clean, making sure that things were going well during services, and at night, he would go out and protect the ghetto. He would find ways to make to the walls of the ghetto. He would find anyone who dared to come in with their lies and their forged evidence, and he would attack. Now, he was under strict orders not to kill. It was strictly a question of, can you take them prisoner? Can you bring them to the police? Can you send them to the authorities? And that's what the golem did. Every night, all around Prague, finding the miscreants, putting them, incapacitating them, and taking them to jail. Well, eventually, the royal prisons underneath Prague Castle became quite full, and Rudolph needed to have a conversation with the Maharal. And Rudolph said, "Okay, look, this isn't great. We've got way too many people being attacked by the golem. They're bruised and battered and in the prison, and I know this is awful, and you're only defending your people, but we've got to figure something out because the economy is just going nowhere fast." And the Maharal said, fine, good, okay, let's work something out. And so Rudolf said, here's the deal. I will guarantee the rights of your community in Prague, guarantee your freedom and ability to worship, make every effort to stop the lie. And in exchange, I need you to turn off the golem. And they came to an agreement. And so the people of Prague, the Jewish people of Prague, were allowed to have their rights and freedoms, and they were guaranteed their ability to worship and live in peace with their neighbors. And in exchange, the Maharal took off the Aleph from the forehead of the golem, sort of smeared it out. And when you take the Aleph away from the word emet, it just becomes met, which means dead. So if truth brought the golem to life, then dead takes it away. So is the story real? Was there really a golem? Was there really a protector of the Jewish community in Prague? Well, we do know that Rudolf did, in fact, guarantee the Jewish community in Prague their ability to worship and live freely. Later, Habsburg rulers didn't follow through, but Rudolf was quite good on that. But here's one of the things that you would notice if you visit Prague. The Old-New Synagogue, if you go on the back, you'll notice something. These iron rungs built into the side of the synagogue that have been there for centuries. And you'll notice they lead to a door in the attic. That's where the golem remains to this day, in the attic of the Old-New Synagogue, with access at night to go and defend the people of Prague. Now, is he really there? Well, we don't know for sure. You would think that if he had been there, that he would have come out in 1938 when the Nazis occupied Bohemia, Czechoslovakia in whole. You would think that if the golem had been able to defend the city against the Nazis, that he would have. The only story that we know from that era is that a Nazi soldier did disobey the orders of his commanding officer and the rabbis and went upstairs into the attic of the Old-New Synagogue and did not come out alive. But we don't know much beyond that. Again, what's fascinating about Prague is that Prague was kept whole, the Jewish community of Prague, while the people were all sent to Buchenwald and other camps, and most of them did not survive the Shoah, the Holocaust. The buildings of Prague, the buildings of Jewish Prague, were kept whole and maintained. Hitler's idea was that he would retain them as a museum of a vanished people, but they're still there today, and that's something to be said. The Maharal's grave in the cemetery of the Jewish quarter is still there. The old cemetery is with graves going back centuries is still there. It's at a significantly higher level than street level because they had to keep burying people on top. The synagogue and 5 other synagogues are still there. And again, slowly but surely, a Jewish community is reforming in Prague even today. So maybe the golem was able to help a little bit. But it does lead to the question of, will the golem ever reawaken? Will he find a reason to come back? Or will he just stay as a lump of clay in the attic of the Old-New Synagogue? You are forbidden to visit the attic. You can go see the Old-New Synagogue on a tour. You can visit Josefov on a tour. You can visit the synagogue. It's beautiful. It's ancient. It's Gothic. It has some remarkable, particularly remarkable architectural details. The designer, when building a Gothic cathedral in Christian Europe, you'll note that the ribs of the nave kind of combine to make the vault of the Gothic ceiling. And there's 4 and they form a cross. Well, the architect here thought, well, I don't want to put a cross in a Jewish synagogue. So they added a 5th, like architecturally unnecessary, but a 5th decorative vault arch to keep, so there wouldn't be a cross formed in the synagogue. There's some unique architectural details like that, but you're not allowed to go into the attic, and we don't know if it's still there or not. So there's my 20-minute presentation, and I bring it up. I picked this presentation today because this time more than ever is when we're seeing lies go around the world, whether they be lies of anti-Semitism, lies of transphobia, something that's very personal to me, lies of homophobia, lies of anti-Muslim ideas, lies of anti-Hispanic ideas. Lies are circulating the world at a record unheard of. I think it's Terry Pratchett who said that a lie will circle the world before the truth has his boots on. And we're going to see more and more of this. And the world needs golems. The world needs people or creatures or others who will be willing to fight back. Another little fascinating thing about golems is the golem is a story of Prague. It's from Prague. It's a story of Bohemian culture. And the word golem, the concept of golem, made it into the English language, meaning the sort of automaton. We have another word in the English language that means automaton, and it comes also from Bohemia, from Czech culture. It's Czech Christian culture in this case, but it came in the 1920s when a Czech author was writing a book about artificial intelligence. And it's a science fiction novel of artificial intelligence taking over the world and of humans trying to interact with it as it gains sentience, which is pretty timely considering it's 100 years ago. But he needed a word for these artificial beings. And his brother recommended building it off of the Czech word roboty, meaning to work. And that's where we get the word robot, also from Czech, also from Bohemia. There's a lot that we get from Bohemia, even when we don't care to admit it, including the concept of Bohemian culture, which has nothing whatsoever to do with Bohemia, being Bohemian and having a rhapsody, or La Boheme, nothing to do with Bohemia at all. But we owe a lot to that. And the world needs defenders. The truth needs defenders. And as you sit through this session today in this setting, this fantastic workshop today, this fantastic conference today, think about, will you be a defender of the truth? What questions do you have? What do we have? I don't know. I can't see the chat. I can't see nothing. What do we got?
Well, thank you very much, Caroline. That was really fascinating. Thank you, and I learned an awful lot. So first up, we have a question from Melinda.
Hi,
How did
Melinda.
how did the Golem story first circulate? Was it in the court, mainly among Jewish citizens?
It actually took a long time for it to go. I think primarily it was a Jewish folktale, and it wasn't really written down. It kind of just circulated as oral tradition. It wasn't written down or really noted until the 1900s during the Second German Empire, when the Reformation or the legalization of Judaism and the creation of Reform Judaism and the integration of Jews into German society, secular German society, allowed these stories to be written down and shared. And so it was a story that was first published in 19th century Germany.
Thank you. Martin Evans says, "What a wonderful story. Thanks so much for sharing. I had only come across the Golem before in the works of Terry Pratchett." I agree pretty much that I'd only really come across golems in fantasy. I think Jonathan Stroud was the first person who wrote about golems to me. How do you feel about the use of golems? Interesting, you talking about robots at the end there. How do you feel about golem becoming a sort of generic fantasy concept rather than necessarily a sort of specific Jewish story?
It's awkward. It's good. I mean, I first learned about golems actually from Dungeons and Dragons, and I used a Dungeons and Dragons picture at the beginning of this presentation. It is an interesting fantasy concept, but I think it shows again I like having it there because I think it's important for us as humans to appreciate that Jewish people are just people, and their stories are universal as anyone else's stories. And the idea of a being created by someone and given a spirit to exist, and whether for good or for ill, is something that I think we can take in any case. And so I think it's great that these ideas are spread across and understood. I just think it's also important to understand where the story comes from in the first place.
Absolutely, thank you. And I find it very fascinating that the golem was invigorated by truth, and yet it was a kind of physical warrior. What do you think a modern day golem would look like, or would you animate it with a different term?
No, I think a modern day golem should be animated by the truth. I think that, again, the truth needs defenders. The truth and fact and reality and science, we need defenders. And in this time more than ever, we don't have that. Now, perhaps there's an opportunity to create something again in to find a way to utilize artificial intelligence in a way that is not easily corrupted, is less likely to be used for malignant ends as it has been. But there may be some way to create an artificial golem on the internet that defends truth. And then it may be just a matter of animating ourselves. And maybe it's less about an artificial being that defends the truth and more about our own willingness as humans to defend the truth in all its forms, in all its guises.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is very interesting that the solution in the story was to create a third party to defend the truth rather than necessarily standing up for themselves. Obviously, that makes it sound like I'm trying to victimize people who are being victimized. I don't mean in that respect. I mean just it's interesting that the sort of fantasy is creating a third party defender when in practice it means more to be prepared to stand up for ourselves.
And I think that is, and there is an element of that too. I mean, and ultimately the Jews of Prague weren't as able to defend themselves and needed someone to defend them. And again, I think if you look at marginalized communities today, it shows the importance of allies. It shows the importance of people who are willing to say, yeah, this isn't me directly, but it's important to me that I defend people who are being injured by lies and by deception and by deceit. And if they're willing to take up arms and allyship, then they're golems too, in a positive way.
Absolutely. And something I really liked about the story was that it then moved into a tale of allyship in that they were then granted rights and freedoms rather than this leading to more conflict with the Christian population.
Yeah,
And
and
actually, that's sorry.
it's really, even though it's kind of mythology brought in to history, the historical element of it, I think, is particularly fascinating, because you do have someone like Rudolph II who was not particularly tied to Catholicism. Right? This is the 1600s, the 1500s, the late 1500s, early 1600s, were the times of the war of the religion in the wars of religion in Europe. This was after the Reformation. This is Europe very strongly divided between Catholicism and Protestantism, with Jews kind of stuck in the middle. And the wars that would percolate throughout Europe would be so destructive. And here was Rudolph, who didn't care about any of it. He just sort of opted out from the idea. And he's maybe again best known for his letter of majesty towards the end of his reign, where he gave all religions, particularly Protestantism and various forms of Protestantism, again, free rights and privileges to practice, even though Bohemia was technically legally a Catholic state. It was a tremendous moment, and one that would eventually lead on to our concept of freedom of religion and separation of church and state. So much of that comes from Rudolph's reign in Bohemia, what's the Czech Republic. It was, of course, only after that his nephew rescinded all of that, absolutely wiped Protestantism off the map in Prague and Bohemia, and started the 30 Years' War. So that went great. it didn't last long, but it was a moment of brilliance or a moment of light in a century that got pretty dark.
Yeah, I mean that sounds fascinating that he considered other, you know, other things beyond just what was right in front of him in that respect. I think one of the problems that um, in my area of history, which is British parliamentary, there's a lot of points where freedom of religion is discussed explicitly referring only to the ones that are right in front of us right now.
Mhm.
And that leads to things like the British law, which was only repealed very recently, that members of the royal family couldn't marry Catholics, but they could marry Hindus because they didn't know Hindus existed, and or at least didn't care.
Didn't care enough, right? Right.
Mm, so interesting that somebody had the kind of presence of mind to think outside the box, I suppose, even if it didn't have a it didn't last forever, but we can still remember it, and that means that we've still gained something from it.
Right, exactly. And I think but that's why we study history to begin with. That's right. That's why we have these the podcasts that we run. That's why we tell these stories. That's why we share this with others is seeing that one of my big takeaways of having done this podcast now for almost or 9 years, just over 8 years, not quite 9 yet, is um how how humans are, that how people across history are just like us. They are no different than we are. Different language, different access to different technologies, but Greeks and Romans and Egyptians and medieval Europeans and ancient Chinese folks and Malayans and Indians and Aztecs, and we all dealt with the same issues, the same feelings, the same concepts and emotions. And seeing how they dealt with things in the past should help us illuminate what we can do in the future.
Absolutely. Elspeth says that she's always saying with her students that humans have been human for a very long time.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true.
And it's definitely something I've seen also in the other presentations that we've been watching across this. There was one earlier on ancient Persia and that kind of thing. And it's like, obviously, that's the whole point of this this exercise. But it's interesting how seeing how the concept of lies or deception can be so you can so easily see that in a civilization 2,000 years ago as you can 500, and yeah, how incredibly relevant it is today.
Yes, absolutely. I think last year we talked about food, and that was another really good one.
Mm.
Just to understand the humanity of the shared experience of people around the world, it helps with that. But I just again, I appreciate having the opportunity to chat with you all today, and to say we need warriors for the truth. Be a golem.
And in that respect, and I realize this it could get very dark very quickly, so you really don't have to answer this if you don't want to. But you opened on a very, very dark note, talking about the blood libel, which is obviously like a really disgusting lie. And but you said that it's still in use today. Is
Mhm.
that is it? Do you want to expand on that a little bit more? I don't want to push into
Yeah,
getting
I mean,
really horrible if you don't want to.
I've heard it. I literally saw an American leftist TikToker referencing it last year, and obviously, there is. I will never defend the Netanyahu regime for anything, right? I'm gonna stress that because he's an asswipe, but Meshuggah, if you will. However, um, those actions are not an excuse to frame an entire people, most of whom do not live in Israel. And even Israelis don't agree on what's happening. So, but we're seeing that, and we've seen, my son has experienced it. The anti-Semitism in school. We're seeing attacks on synagogues. We've been seeing lots of things, and yeah, the protocols of the elders of Zion, which is a lie. It's a fake document created in the 19th century. The blood libel. It's all being respread and re-brought out throughout the world as an excuse to dehumanize Jewish people. And um, that same dehumanization is happening in America for Latinos. It's happening for trans people. It's happening for anyone who is a conveniently marginalized community that the rest of the country feels that they don't need to care about. And it's again that the lie is so easy to spread. And with the disappearance of fact checking, we're going to see it continue to get worse. We talk about darkness. It's going to get much darker, much darker. I have a hard time even finding the opportunity to I have a hard time finding hope at all. And one of the little bits of hope I have is that we are able to get together as a history podcasting community and talk about these sorts of things, because I don't know that in America, at least, I don't know that there's any hope left.
Yeah, I mean, that's a it certainly feels that the world is getting darker at the moment.
Moral of the story, if you are in a country that isn't America and have need for an experienced credit union C-level executive, call me up.
Please, yeah, just move here to the UK. We're definitely being affected by America a lot. But no, I actually, it was interesting you mentioned fact checkers, because that was what I immediately leapt to in my head in terms of a modern version of the golem would be something that pursues truth.
Mhm.
Um,
But
and
fact checkers only work if they're allowed to happen, and they only work if they're allowed to do their job. And the main social networks have said now, no, we don't want facts. We don't want truth. We're not interested in this unless it's our version of truth. It's devastating.
absolutely, yeah. And it's also, people have to believe them. People have to be prepared to. This is the thing that I find so scary about what we hear what we hear of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Putin's full-scale war, as every British newscaster will always make sure to say, is that people who are being lied to all the time don't necessarily know what to believe. And then you think, well, actually, we're lied to a lot as well.
Mm-hmm.
Terrifying. We're coming to the end, but I think we might have time for one more question if anybody wants to quickly say anything. We've got about 3 minutes, so if there's anything left that anybody wants to ask, and if not, then we can. Aha, Elspeth has asked, do you have any thoughts on how golems have been portrayed in literature?
Oh, I would say generally speaking, one of the challenges is that um, so often golems are portrayed as creatures that may have been formed for a good purpose and they get out of control, run rampant, and then have to be stopped. And it's fascinating because the original story is no, it didn't necessarily kill, and it was it was a decision to decommission it as opposed to destroy. Um, so I do think there's an element of some of that changing. That the story is different when it's something that becomes like a Skynet or the Terminator, something that was supposed to be good that runs out of control and needs to be destroyed or stopped. The Matrix. There's a lot there that we could unpack. But I think it's important to kind of go back to the original piece of that it's about truth more than anything else.
Absolutely. I think that's a much brighter note than what we were talking about a minute ago. Do you have any other closing statement to make?
No, but thanks. Fight the power. United we stand, y'all. We can do it.
Thank you very much, Caroline. This has been really wonderful, and I've learned an awful lot. Thank you. And thank you, all of our listeners and all future listeners online and via various podcast apps. Thank you very much for taking part, and see you all again soon.
Thanks.